How did Killua not know Nen? This young, honorable, and very sharp fingernailed assassin lad is one of the greatest yet most inconsistent characters in all of the Hunter x Hunter. Full disclosure, Killua is my personal favorite character, but he's also the one that tends to melt my mind brain the most. Because Killua's character proposition at the start of the series is that he is physically young, but has a wealth of experience. He is a powersome veteran of the world. However, as time goes on, Killua needs to serve the Gon role as the bright-eyed amateur dude guy learning about the world for the first time. And these two contrasting elements are very difficult to pull off within a single character, especially when it comes to Nen. One of the biggest questions in the series is exactly how Killua went through his whole life up until meeting Gon without so much as discovering the concept of Nen. And the most common explanation for this, which I often subscribe to, is that Togashi didn't plan the Nen system when he started writing Hunter x Hunter, which has led to a series of outright plot holes scattered throughout Hunter x Hunter, several of which entwine with Killua, such as how he could have possibly spent 2 years at Heaven's Arena without encountering a single drop of that juicy aura, or how does Killua perform what appear to be Nen abilities without invoking the Nen system, and most egregiously, how did Killua recognize Zeno's Dragon Dive during the Chimera Ant arc when he had had no opportunity to see it beforehand? Again, the easy answer to all of those is that Togashi didn't plan Nen, and we will be discussing the points both for and against that idea. However, there is also a competing hypothesis, one which interests me quite a bit, which is that Togashi may have planned Nen, but he did not plan Killua. He didn't anticipate the role that Killua would go on to play in the series, and so it has left the character vulnerable to quite a few narrative contradictions. Either way, what we have here is a character who is simultaneously experienced yet a complete amateur. A character who understands the world, has lived in it, and yet knows nothing about it. And a character who has both seen and experienced Nen on several occasions, and yet still has no idea that the concept even exists. That is the Killua problem, and we are going to solve it. Also, this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends, the quintessential AAA championsome experience. But look, what good are champions without some bosses to use them on? Luckily, Raid is full of super tough bosses like big old dragons, super hot fire knights, a very brisk ice golem, a spider, that one there, I'm used to fighting that already in Australia, and the Minotaur, which is a very angry cow man. And right now, love is in the air, as new players can enjoy a special Valentine's Day themed adventure with Raid Love Quest. All you need to get involved is to download Raid, copy your in-game player ID, and then head to raidlovequest.plarium.com to play one of the Valentine's themed minigames for a chance to win some fantastic in-game and real-life prizes, including Valentine's Day themed Raid champions, and even Amazon gift cards worth up to $1,000. And if you're an existing player, you can use this special promo code to receive a small Valentine's Day gift from Raid to you. Plus, new players use my link or scan the QR code right here and get a free starter pack with this cool in-game loot. So go do that thing, but for now it's back to you, me. And going chronologically, the first issue we encounter is Heaven's Arena. Killua was abandoned here by Silver at the age of 6 and told that he couldn't come home until he reached the 200th floor, which took Killua until the age of 8 to do. Now at face value, this seems fairly reasonable. I mean, not abandoning your child at the brutal combat place, but in terms of the general argument of the video, the 200th floor is where all of the Nen users reside. And Killua never actually stepped onto that floor. He just won the right to, and then he went home. But that is a bit of an oversimplification, because the 200th floor is just the point where everyone knows how to use Nen, and if not, then they are brutally initiated. But that doesn't mean you won't encounter a Nen user on floors 1 through 199. Killua himself discovered this during his second stay at the arena, where he fought against Zushi on the 57th floor, with Zushi using both Ten and Ren in his fight against Killua. To be fair, he wasn't supposed to use Ren. Zushi just got a little bit upset and then, you know, it happens. But the point is that it's not some sort of unspoken rule not to use Nen until you reach the 200th floor. It's just that by that time, knowing Nen is the absolute bare minimum. And I can believe that Gon and Killua didn't encounter any Nen users, aside from Zushi that is, on their journey to the 200th floor, because it only took them a week to get there and very much fast-tracked the entire process. However, for a much more younger Killua, it took a whole 2 years to reach the 200th floor, and so it's a much bigger ask to believe that he never fought a Nen user. Although maybe he did and he just never realized. Like Zushi, Killua may have just thought, you know, damn, that guy's tough for some reason. But at the same time, Heaven's Arena is also at the center of a much greater Nen controversy, because it does televise matches featuring high-level Nen users on the 200th floor and even above with all of the floor masters. And sure, people can't see the actual abilities being used, I mean, unless it's conjuration, but magical powers are still well and truly on display. Taking Castro, for example, people watched him literally clone himself, and Killua would have been exposed to so much of that over the course of 2 years. If not fighting against it, then just having it present and in your face space at all times in the arena. Now, this isn't a plot hole. That comes later. The Heavens Arena issue is much more of an appetizer, because it just requires a much greater suspension of disbelief than usual to buy. Also, fun fact, when Gon and Killua reached the 200th floor, there were, not including the boys, 171 fighters on standby, all of whom were combat-geared Nen users. To put that number into some perspective, that is almost a third of the entire Hunter Association. I mean, yes, it includes fighters like Guido, but the Hunter Association isn't all that great either, containing figures like Pockle and Barry. Yeah, there's a dude literally named Barry. I'm sure he's powerful. But more accurately, he's probably mid at best as an aura wielder. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if everyone at Heaven's Arena banded together, then they would have a pretty decent chance of overthrowing the association. And on another note, it really puts into perspective just how many unregistered aura users there are out there in the world. It's a lot. To some family issues now, one common explanation for Killua's lack of knowledge is that his family wanted to train him at a later age. I don't think that this argument really holds up because they trained Killua in all sorts of other horrifically brutal ways, and also taught him allegedly superhuman but non-Nen based abilities. Plus, it completely falls apart when you consider Kalito. He is the younger Zoldyck sibling and had a fully fledged ability and the general mastery of aura to be considered a Phantom Troop applicant by the time that he was still somewhere between the ages of 10 and 11. Meanwhile, at the same age, Killua still didn't even know that Nen existed. There is a better Zoldyck family argument, which we will get to in a bit, but first it's really important that we address Killua's abilities. Before being able to control aura, Killua possessed an arsenal of dark arts, the most iconic of which being the Rhythm Echo, which was explained as an application of silent gates resulting in the creation of afterimages. It's explained pretty well, to be honest, and I 100% buy it at the time. However, if this sort of thing was introduced post Heaven's Arena, then it would be 100% a Nen ability. And the explanation would be something like Killua either conjures or emits the afterimages, with part of the ability cost being to perform the silent gates perfectly. Meanwhile, another one of the Killua dark arts are the transformative claws that he can invoke at any given time with those funky razor sharp nails that do all of the decapitating. And again, if this was introduced post Heaven's Arena, then it would be explained as a Nen ability. It would be either very obvious enhancement like what Ramot did with his feathers, or maybe even conjuration, because we have seen conjurers kind of weirdly contort and manipulate their bodies. Well, you know what? Having mentioned the M word, it could also be manipulation, like how Illumi is able to control his body shape. However, that would be pretty inaccessible to Killua, as it is his exact opposite affinity as a transmuter. To bring things back, here's the basic hypothesis. Togashi did not plan Nen. As a result, a series of characters in Hunter x Hunter with more experienced roles are brought to life with a baked-in set of powers. This includes all of Killua's superhuman abilities, but also stuff like Hisoka's cards, and Illumi's at that stage very vague yet scary powers. The difference between Killua and the latter two is that after Nen was brought up, it could be retroactively applied to them. Hisoka and Illumi fit very nicely into the newly established boxes, and because they were mysterious antagonistic entities, they were allowed the luxury of being considered Nen users all along. This is a luxury that Killua did not have. His abilities could not fit into the aura system because his protagonistic character arc needed him to be unaware of Nen, which results in these early inconsistencies. That's the basic one, but here is the less basic hypothesis. Togashi did plan Nen, however Killua's character arc was not planned to the extent that he was going to become a student alongside Gon. His role could have been to introduce Gon to or even teach Gon Nen. Or not, I mean it could have been a lot of things. I don't like speculating on original intentions too much, because Togashi himself didn't even know at the time, but Killua does have a third dark art ability that a lot of people often forget called the Snake Awakens, or Serpent Work in the Viz translation. A skill whereby his arms seem to take on these tentacle-like properties, which is eerily similar to the Tentacle-Ish Technique used by Yuppie in his fight against Shoot. I'm willing to write that off as, you know, a bit of artistic flair. Yuppie is of course doing it literally, whilst Killua is invoking artistic license for the sake of atmosphere. Tentacle-y atmosphere. The reason why it matters though is because the Snake Awakens isn't shown to us until the Chimera Ant arc. Long after Killua has actually learned Nen. However, Togashi makes no attempt to explain it with aura, and in fact he strongly suggests the exact opposite, that this is one of the pre-existing assassin techniques, which significantly weakens the inconsistency argument, because now Togashi is adding new non-aura based skills even after Nen has become a fully formed system. But it could also be Togashi recognizing his early retrospective inconsistencies and trying to blend these two power systems together in a much nicer, neater way. There's also the explanation that Killua's pre-existing skill set is an unconscious use of Nen. This is possible because in chapter 50, Wing explains that Gon has unconsciously learned Zetsu and may have actually been using it throughout a lot of his life due to growing up in all of the natures and stuff. Although the key difference is that Zetsu is a basic principle of Nen, whereas Killua's skill set would be a series of fully realized Hatsu. So it's a lot harder to buy that it's an unconscious manifestation, but then again, it's not like he would be the first to do so. Komugi is a great example of someone who created a Nen ability without ever knowing what Nen was, so it could absolutely happen with Killua as well. But the one thing that is incredibly difficult to reckon with either way is Dragon Dive. At the commencement of the palace invasion, the extermination team are subject to Xeno Zoldic's Dragon Dive, with the narrator stating something along the lines of, "Nobody except Killua knew what was happening," when in fact it really should have stated, "Nobody, including Killua, knew what was happening," because there is no way that he actually saw the ability before this point. Because after learning Nen, Killua didn't encounter his family again until this point. So one explanation is that he did in fact see it as a child, but it was all invisible. He just sort of saw the destruction happening around. With the other explanation being that he heard stories about it as a child, which he still is. Killua is still a child. I think I often forget that. Both of which aren't amazing because Killua knew exactly what was happening in less than a second. There was no time to go, "Hey, this is similar to a thing I've heard," or "Hey, this is kind of similar to the invisible grandfather ability I saw that one time." There was none of that. Killua just knew. And I honestly believe that in this moment, Togashi forgot, which is fair enough, that happens. Writing stories is hard, but it's a plot hole that can only be filled by the fan base waking up at 5 a.m. every morning to train ever so hard in order to perform the mental gymnastics required to explain it. Now, with that said, there is one idea that can potentially solve the Killua problem. Whether it was planned or whether it was more likely accidental by Togashi, there is something that we can latch onto, which is the thought that Killua was deemed a problem child by both Silver and Illumi. They both feared that he would run away from the family forever if he was equipped with the power to do so, and as a result, they decided to purposely delay Killua's Nen training in an attempt to retain control over him. This would explain why Kaluto was trained at a much younger age than Killua, because Kaluto was deemed, a good boy and thus worthy of the auras, but it also ensures that Killua would not have the tools required to remove Illumi's needle, which he did do in about a year after learning Nen. And so with the Hunter exam, Illumi may not necessarily have needed a license for a job as he stated, and he may have entered to purposely ensure that Killua failed, because if he passed the exam, then he would be taught Nen in the secret final phase. And to a lesser degree, being a licensed hunter would give Killua the ultimate physical freedom. He can travel almost anywhere and earn practically unlimited monies. And that kind of ultimate freedom is very counterproductive if you're trying to control him. Plan would have been to mold Killua mentally before giving him access to the full potential of a Nen user. Although if this was the case, Silver clearly didn't invest in it too much, because during the Zoldyck arc, he just sort of went, whatever, and let Killua go with Gon, believing that his son would return one day due to reasons. Even so, I still think that this is the best solution to the Killua problem. If we really need something to latch onto, then that's it. Although the truth is more likely that there's nothing wrong with Togashi's writing style. The improvised nature of Hunter x Hunter has made it one of the greatest fictional works of all time, in my opinion, but the lack of planning does come at a cost here and there, with Killua forming quite a difficult intersection of ideas. Because thinking about it, he has to simultaneously be both Gon and Hisoka. Killua has to be the bright-eyed young boy on a journey of discovery, but also the grizzled, experienced, powerful murderer. And I do think that Togashi pulled that balance off better than he, quite frankly, had any right to.